Thank you all for coming. I know it's been actually quite a few years since we have not met all in person. So I appreciate that you made the effort to come in person. And for the other people that have joined online, I'm also very excited to have also this new format that's in person and hybrid today. So for the people that have stayed at home in the offices as well, good morning to all of you. In fact, the last user group we had in person was, I think, about 2.5 years ago. So, of course, before the pandemic, and a lot of things have happened since then. But during the pandemic, actually, the community stayed strong. We had, multiple user groups, and we tried to keep the community going and providing some content to all the business object community through the different webinars we put together, Caresoft put together, SAP put together, CBeyond Data put together. So that has been great. For the event of today, I would like to introduce you two of my coworkers from Wiiisdom 360 Suite. Scott Farley, you want to say a word?
First and foremost, thank you again for everybody coming. For those who are online, don't forget, at around 11 o'clock, you need to fire up your barbecues.
That's right.
All right. You don't get off easy if you're at home. But thank you. Thank you very much for coming.
Jeff?
Good morning, Jeff Caron. Well, I'll have a chance to talk a lot more in a minute, but it's good to be here and meet you in person.
And then today we've got some people from Caresoft around that have really helped for all the organization. I don't see them in the room, and they'll come later. The other cool thing for today is during lunchtime. So we're going to have a barbecue. So trust me, I will not be cooking. It's just my daughter told me, Dad, you like to grill at home, but like we tell you, it's always good, but it's not so good. So just make sure you don't grill. So, but actually, the guy down there, Scott, the big tall guy there from Wiiisdom 360, he's actually a very good cook, in fact, but he's not going to cook as well today. So I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing, but anyway, we're going to have a great time today. So for the sessions we're going to have today, so the first sessions we're going to have is on tips and tricks for doing Webi documents, how to improve Webi documents, how to improve performances. So JF will be presenting that. JF actually started on business objects, what, a year ago, or how many years ago was that, JF?
A few years ago.
So what, 94? So I guess he probably knows just a little bit business objects, I assume, or I hope, or that's what his resume says anyway. So the second session after that will be presented by Patrick Sims. So Patrick is actually working for SAP COE, and a lot of you in the federal community know him because he's usually the guy for BobJ. So he's going to present the SAP roadmap. He's going to talk about PC and all the latest from SAP. And I hope you'll have some words on the next release of BobJ, the 4.2 SP3, I think that's due at the end of the year. The third session, 4.3 SP3, sorry about that. Thank you very much. The session after will be presented by CBeyond Data. That's actually one of our partners that we've had also for a long, long time, which are based in DC supporting the federal community. And they'll be talking about HANA and BobJ. Keith Johnson will be presenting that topic, and I believe he's the CTO of CBeyond Data. After that, we'll have a short break. After the break, we'll have another session that will be on tips and tricks on how to go to 4.3, how to move to the cloud. So over the years, we've done, frankly, a couple thousand migrations. And so I guess we kind of know what to do, and we put together a methodology that we'll go through, and we'll go through that step by step, and we'll explain, okay, you go to 4.3, what you should do. You want to go to the cloud, what you should do, and how as well Wiiisdom 360 Suite can help you. Finally, the last session will be presented by David Barge. and will be on NS2. And what's the NS2 offering for the community? So as you know, the NS2 is the federal part of SAP if you want to be hosted on the GovCloud of SAP. So, well, I think we're going to get things started. I'll pass things over to JF for the first session. Thank you very much. Jeff?
Thank you, Bruno. Okay, for today's presentation, I thought I could bring things a little bit more in perspective, look at the big picture about Webi performance. So there will be a little bit of everything for everybody. So let's see what we have on the menu for today. So we're talking about optimization. We want to see, first of all, why should we even bother? Then I'll tell you how I tend to approach things, and then we'll cover in report options, because at the end of the day, that's what we have most control over, but you will see there are other options. Talk a little bit about some pre-built choices, and then we'll have a summary and a Q&A session. Okay, so why do you want to optimize your reporting at all? Well, first of all, our customers want to, be satisfied. There's nobody is going to use reports that take way too long to refresh or to even skip, from one tab to another. So there's definitely a need there. The effect of having good performance will be a better adoption and retention of our end users, our actual customers. Productivity is obviously a key. If you're stuck with a tool that takes 10 minutes to refresh before you can go on with your work, that's not going to help. And also collaboration between the developers and the end users will be a lot smoother if we have good performance. Now, this here hardware does not fix everything. I mean, for a long time, we have started adding faster and better and more powerful hardware to our solutions. But we've reached a point where, that doesn't fix everything. We have to look at other ways to optimize the performance of our different solutions. So hardware is not everything. We have to look elsewhere. And how should you look at optimizing? Well, it's about not wasting. So it's getting rid of all the dead weight that we may carry along with whatever solution we are developing. And that's what we will focus on. I think it's important to keep the big picture in mind. That's what I mean by a holistic approach. You have to look at all the moving parts in order to achieve your end goal, which is lightning fast reports. I actually made up this, so the waterfall paradigm. The document is really the end of your chain. That's the end result. That's where you want to see the results. But it all starts much higher up, and each piece in that chain will have an impact on your overall performance. And I will explain that coming up is the changes that you make upstream, that is, before the document, will have the broadest effect, not necessarily the biggest impact, but I will show you what I mean by that in just a second. So when you're looking at a report, in this case, a web intelligence document, there's several pieces that come into play. And not all of them are accessible to your document developer. I recognize that. And this is where, we're going to start talking about collaboration. But if you are just, quote unquote, a Webi developer, you will have to ask other people if you see the need for optimization upstream. So even, as I said, if you're a developer of reports, you still have to keep in mind what's coming your way and basically figure out where things can be improved. So this is, in a nutshell, the chain for a business objects document, a web intelligence document in this particular instance. And it all starts at the application level. Your in-house application, your ERP, any off-the-shelf application that you may have will have somewhere some form of a database that contains the information that ultimately you want to display in your document. Well, there is already something that could be done there, but we'll cover them in detail a little further down. Then typically you will have some form of an intermediate storage. I called it a data warehouse here. There's different terminology that could be used. And to go from application database to data warehouse, you will have an ETL. And that ETL can have a very significant impact on how it will configure, how it will format and aggregate possibly your information, thereby making it easy to report on improving performance. Universe, we'll talk about a number of things we can improve at universe level. In your Webi report, you will have a query. There's different elements there that you can tailor again to make the best out of what you have. And then finally, in the document itself, as you develop the document, there's a number of techniques that you can use to make it run faster. So let's cover that in a little bit more detail. The application level. Well, if it's not an in-house application, typically there's very little that you can do there. I have, over the years, been exposed to quite a few situations where the universe is where the reporting was done directly against the application database. Okay, it tends to be a thing of the past, but occasionally, especially on smaller systems, you may encounter that. But what can you optimize at application level? Maybe the DBA can add a few indices or things like that, but sometimes, and often actually, it will clash with your online processing, right? I mean, indexes have to be updated on the fly, not necessarily something you can optimize there. So we don't really look at it too closely, but it's always an option. Then your intermediate storage, your data warehouse. So as I said, you will ETL into a structure that is dedicated for reporting. And this is where you can have a very big impact in on the performance of your reporting. The structure of your tables will be dedicated for any kind of reporting. You will have aggregate tables, you will have a flattened structure, what have you. There's a lot of techniques that can come into play here. And also there, typically, you can afford to put any kind of indexing that supports your reporting. So already a big jump forward here. As a Webi developer, do you have access to that? No, but you may have an input to the teams who develop that and, let them know. Okay, so as I said, simplified tables, flattened schema. You can add the contents of lookups into the tables themselves, so you don't have extra tables. All of that will help improving the performance. Now, we're getting into the business object specific content, the universe. So there are a lot of recommendations around universes, and we won't have time to cover every little bit today, but one recommendation, and it's sometimes hard to implement, I recognize that, but a universe should be as focused as possible. Understand, as small as possible. The bigger your universe, the more complex it becomes, and the more compromises you have to make, you know, with optimizing joins and things like that. So, excuse me, the smaller you can make, the more focus you can make your universe, the better. And let's face it, it's always going to be a compromise, because if your universe is too small, you will have to use several universes to get a result. And there's a performance issue, there's a complexity issue there, but do the best you can. Aggregate awareness is a solution that I have not seen used a lot in the field. Some customers use it, and it's actually a very, very powerful feature. What aggregate awareness does, if you're not familiar with that, is that it will dynamically redirect your query to different tables depending on the question you're asking, without the end user or the report developer changing anything to the query. If you add a level of detail or remove a level of detail, the query will be generated differently, hitting aggregate tables, hence the name of the solution. So something you definitely want to look into if you're a universe developer, or talk to your universe developers if you're not. Index awareness, we were talking about lookup tables. One way to optimize, if you can do it at ETL level, is to include the contents of your lookup tables in the table itself, so you don't have an extra table. If you cannot do that, index awareness will use a clever query generation when you're putting conditions on something that would be a lookup, and it will use, well, an ID instead of using a long text string, which eliminates the table from your query and again improves performance. Okay, again, that is a not very well known feature. Few people use it, and it's not always applicable, but it is definitely something you should keep in mind. Data federation options, I will skip that one because it's kind of a hit and miss, as well as delegated measures. It's also a technique that allows you to dynamically modify the query depending on what question you are asking. Now we're getting into the Webi document itself. And here there's a lot to say. Again, that's the piece that is customer facing, and that's also where you can degrade performance a lot. Because until then, all we were talking about was the speed at which we retrieve the data into the document. But once it's in the document, there's a lot more happening. You know, it's the visualization. There's the formatting that's happening there, and that's where you can hurt a lot your performance. So these are the bullet points, right? Limit the number of queries, manage your scope of analysis, your filters, and what select objects you are going to use. The number of queries. Well, it's been a feature of Web Intelligence for a long time now that you can have multiple queries, possibly on different universes, usually on different universes, and merge the results. You will have common dimensions that will stitch together, if you will, your different queries, and then, you know, present an aggregated results. Well, there's several issues or potential issues with that. One of them is that not all objects will be compatible between the two queries. So it introduces sort of a limitation, but that doesn't really have an impact on performance. There's also the risk of misleading results. Dimensions are what drive the quote unquote stitching, the merging of the different queries, but the measures are not limited to something that makes sense. And so you can have very misleading results that are technically correct, but it looks like you have a lot more revenue than is there is in reality. So that's something you want to avoid. The scope of analysis. How many of you use drill down in their Webi reports? Okay. So that is one of the solution is using the built-in drill down of Web Intelligence. Now, the scope of analysis is basically telling the query ahead of time where you are going to navigate, where you are going to drill. And so basically, it's as if you included those extra objects in your query ahead of time. Of course, the more data you put in your query, the more likely you are to slow down the performance of the query. So you have to be mindful of that. Just, put in there what is going to be actually used. The filtering. Well, the filtering is a fantastic feature, especially when it's dynamic. You use input controls and whatnot. But again, you want to use that carefully. You don't want to bring the entire database in your report and then filter it out to whatever you want to see. Again, very big hit on performance. And along the same lines, the objects you select there are very important. And finally, in the document, avoid merge dimensions. So I said, limit the number of queries. This goes hand in hand with avoiding merge dimensions. The more dimensions you are including and emerging in your report, the bigger the impact on the performance. So we'll use filters and input controls. We'll talk about scheduling and bursting your reports. Again, depending on your situation, it will be very useful. And query stripping is also a very nice tool. So overall, there are many options that, in fact, may conflict with each other. So you have to be careful what you're doing. You have to understand the business goal of your design. Okay. Again, there's not a single big picture, a single recipe. By that I mean you have to keep the big picture in mind, and you don't necessarily have a direct impact on all the steps, which is why you must make sure you keep communication open with the entire team or teams involved with the design of your reporting solution. So you want all layers to be in harmony. And of course, you will need to get feedback. If you don't know what performance is and how do you define good performance? How long is a piece of rope, right? So in order to gauge that, you need subjective feedback from your users. Do they feel that it's good or bad performance? But also take a look at your logs, use appropriate solutions to see what is really happening in your system. So let me go a little deeper into some of those options that we covered earlier. So in your query, make your query as small as practical. Don't bring in data you're not going to use in your report. But also, I want you to add objects if you're going to use drill down. Right there, you have conflicting options, right? It all depends on what you're trying to achieve. And there is actually an option that is good and bad at the same time. It's the query drill options. You can tell when you specify your scope of analysis that the query should be amended dynamically. Let's take a very stupid example. You have a report of revenue by year, very high level query. So you have two objects in your query panel, and it's year and a measure sales revenue. When you run that, that's exactly what you have. What's going to happen if you use that dynamic scope of analysis, when you in the report or the end user on the report clicks on the year to drill down to month, the query will be dynamically modified, will add a filter for the year you clicked on, and will bring in the month for that particular year. Well, what's the impact of that? Now you are generating a brand new query. You're going back to the database, you're querying again, but your result set is small. The alternative to that is to bring in the month ahead of time in your scope of analysis, but you will have a bigger query result, but you will filter dynamically and not go back to the database. What's best? Well, it depends, right? That's the whole point. If you have a very fast database and very fast indexes and things like that, that's dynamic is probably good. In the opposite situation, you want to consider using fixed queries, fixed scope of analysis. Also, the size of the data matters a lot, right? There's a feature that I think people are more and more aware of. It's the query stripping. So in a nutshell, what it does is rewrite your query for the document. How many times have we, and I'm the first culprit here, cloned a document, cloned a Webi report for a different purpose, and it has everything I need. I don't touch the query, and there's some extra objects there that I don't need at all. So I have, and especially if it's an aggregate query, I have too much data for what I'm trying to accomplish. It will be all aggregated in the report, but I don't need all that. Query stripping is a smart feature of Webi that needs to be turned on in the universe and in your query panel that will effectively remove any objects that are not used in your report from the query. They will still be visible in the query panel, but in the reality behind the scenes, Web Intelligence will not get that, and therefore improving performance. Of course, you want to go back and clean up later, and there's actually a highlighting that happens in Webi showing you which objects are being stripped, and you can do that cleanup. But in the meantime, it will, help, especially if those are made by end users that don't necessarily understand all that. It will be done automatically for them. So we were talking about multiple queries earlier and merged dimensions. So the big problem with that, and if you ever played with a large number of queries in a document, there's an impact on performance, a big impact on performance. So the report itself, once the 2 or more queries have been retrieved, it has to calculate in the report all the interactions, all the correlations between your 2, 3, 4 queries. Okay, so that's what I mean by the report must calculate the queue. And well, it costs, and it costs post query. It's when, the query is done and people are in front of the screen waiting for that Webi to render. And it's nearly exponential, or at least that's how it feels. The more queries you have, the bigger, exponentially bigger, the degradation of performance. Okay, I have seen Webi reports with 14 queries in them and more. And trust me, you would not want to work with those documents. Who uses a large number of queries in their Webi? Okay. By necessity, is it the only way you can write them, or was it done like that before? Yeah. So the answer is it all depends on your database. It depends how your database is architected. And sometimes, yeah, you have no choice but go pick things here and there and combine them in the report. So that goes back to my initial point, right? You don't necessarily have control over the whole chain, and sometimes you are forced to compromise in your report. If you can go back to the source, all the better. I mentioned earlier, potentially misleading results. There's another option that's available since 4.2, it's parallel execution of queries. So that's a plus. Previous to that, all the queries, your 14 or 50, yes, I've seen one example with 50 queries, will be executed one after the other. Since 4.2, they can be, or a certain number of them can be executed in parallel to improve document performance. But keep in mind that degrades database performance. You're hitting other people. Now the pre-built choices. What do I mean by pre-built? Well, the document will be generated ahead of time and then consumed without access to the database. So what are the solutions? There's the push, okay, the bursting. Okay, it's fairly common. So there are different choices there. You can have a common version of your report that is pushed to everybody, or few variations. There's like, you work with 3 departments. Each department has their own report. You can have, all 3 reports pushed that way. Then you can have what I call the true burst, which would be a personalized, possibly down to the individual, but also, smaller groups. And then you have, instead of the push, you have the option of portal documents or instances. Same thing here. So you can have global reports like your annual, company annual report that would be very global, or again, selective. People will get a different version of the report or different content based on who they are. The navigation via hyperlinks is also a pre-built option that would be an alternative, and actually I like it very much, to drilling down. Drilling down is kind of limited in what kind of format you can use, so it has a very narrow usage band. If you use navigation via hyperlinks, you can actually go from one report with a structure to another document with a completely different structure that is effectively a drill down of where you came from. And it can be static, it's pre-calculated, or it can be dynamic. It can refresh on the fly, but still based on what link you clicked on. Again, potential for huge improvement on performance rather than your traditional drill down. For the push options, you can email a copy of the report. You can email a link. What's nice about that, it's instant access. You have it in your email, or you have minimal response time if you have a link to an instance. If I push a copy of the report, you can, look at it on the plane. Although nowadays we have Wi-Fi on the plane, so it's kind of a moot point. But my point is, offline, you still have your document, even if you don't have internet access. On the downside, you can have too much data because I have to push everything you may need, even if you don't use it all the time. And a problem that will be highlighted very frequently is weaker security. If it's downloaded, it's there on your laptop, it's accessible, there's no security attached to it, unless we have them password protected. And we have solutions that allow you to password protect the documents you transmit. So even if it's on your laptop, you still need the password to look at them. Bursting, so as I mentioned, individual copies or links. Again, it will be a push option, instant access, minimum response time. It will be focused. It will be therefore smaller. You have a smaller set of data, but it's a little bit more complex to manage. Okay. Again, there are solutions out there, and we have definitely one very good one that helps the management of your bursts, of your distribution of documents to whatever population you're addressing. portal. That's what we call the pull model. Obviously, it's the end user that goes there and pulls the results. It's not automatic. So the advantage of pushing is that people get the report. It serves as a reminder. The user has to be online and decide to go and pull their reports in that scenario. But on the other hand, you have less email traffic, which can be an issue. I can mention a number of customers that have a problem. Also, some of them have a very slow email system. Don't ask me why, but that's a fact. And it's causing them problems to have a big email traffic. And also stronger security, because you have to log in, at least in most portals, you have to log in before you can consume your reports. So again, stronger security, your document theoretically cannot fall into the wrong hands. And again, here, your report can be global, one copy for all. That's, of course, very simple to set up. You just send one report for everybody and you give them access. Or it can be selective. It can be personalized by groups or even individuals, but then you have to manage that in your setup, in your security setup, to make sure the right people get the right copy of or the right version of the document. And of course, generation will become a little bit more complex, but again, with the right tool, with the right bursting tool, we can easily manage that. And of course, will require security. I say may, but that's not the case. Okay. Navigation via hyperlinks. I will fly over that because I already talked about it. So you have complete freedom of format compared to standard drill. Standard drill, doesn't let you do whatever you want. Can be static or refreshed. I mentioned that. So depending on your particular business case, you may have to refresh them on the fly, or you can have, statically refreshed data just there for consumption. You can use your business intelligence portal, business objects in this case, but there are also other portals that are available out there, or even, like I've seen with a lot of my customers, in-house build version of the portal based on SharePoint or even development from scratch. So the concept remains the same. Okay. So I hope I didn't forget anything crucial. Acceptable response time is what you're after, right? The users want the results right there, right now. It's important to get feedback and have a feedback loop and improve as you get feedback. We have many moving parts, and definitely the document design plays a big role, but it's not everything. So there's everything upstream has to be taken into consideration, whether or not you're the people doing it, or you can provide input to the people who actually manage that. And clearly, and I think that's the key takeaway here, is there is no absolute answer. There's no one size fits all. It all depends on your business case and also on your technical landscape. I can give you recommendations like that all day, and you will still come up with a different approach because your situation is different. So that's why you need good advice on your particular situation. Okay, I think that pretty much covers it. Any questions, comments? Yes, sir. Yeah. And I don't know if you can be heard. So I will summarize what you said just for our online audience. So you said, you know, the more interactive your document, the more performance is important, because you will have each time, with each interaction, a potential wait time, and that is the biggest impact versus just a big finance report that you download once and read at your leisure. Did I summarize it well? And the second thing you said is data architecture is also key in there, and also the understanding by the universe developer of the data structure. And again, I would like to add what you said. It's a collaboration, right? You, as a universe developer, you can influence the data architecture, at least at the reporting model, and vice versa. So absolutely, I think it's a great comment. Thank you very much. Anyone else?